Colorado Springs.
Nearly 500,000 people.
Olympic City, USA.
Garden of the Gods.
Pikes Peak.
It's a growing city.
Our local government has a lot of employees. What exactly do they do?
How does it impact my life?
This is where you find out.
Behind the Springs, an inside look at your local government.
Welcome back to another edition of Behind the Springs. Well, you've likely heard a lot about the protests, and while we addressed them during our last episode with our mayor and police chief, we also talked about what's next in terms of local action and change. One thing happening right now is the proposed formation of a police advisory committee. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ted Skroback.
And I'm Jen Schreuder. Our guest today is Colorado Springs City Council member Wayne Williams, and he has been one of the leaders in the effort to follow up about plans for this committee and some of the next steps. And Wayne, we want to thank you for your time and being with us.
Thanks for having me here today.
And I want to inform our listeners about the City Council work session that just took place in order to discuss those next steps. Can you start by giving our listeners kind of a synopsis for those folks who don't know what took place?
Sure. Yesterday at City Council, we had a special work session. We brought in, and this was part of an ongoing process. And actually, can I start at kind of the beginning and tell us how we got there?
Yes.
So in February, a number of us attended a program at Relevant Word Ministries. There was a discussion of a symposium being held in Austin, Texas. Ultimately, I asked the police chief if he would send some officers down. He did. Actually, I asked him for one. He sent two. And then I also went down as a representative of City Council. But we weren't the only ones there. There were also members from our community there, from the business, from the religious community, from others. All of us attending, and that group became known kind of colloquially as the Austin group.
Okay.
And that group has continued to meet over the last several months to discuss processes, to discuss ways we can make police and community relations better. And so that group has been meeting, I along with them, on a number of occasions, usually about once every 2 weeks. Then in April, we had a presentation to council about where we were going and what the thoughts were. That has then continued the process. And then it accelerated with some of the events going on in recent days. And the decision was made to advance the discussion we were going to have at our June council meeting to a special session. That took place yesterday. At that session, we had individuals who were part of the Austin group present. We also had individuals, one or two individuals from the protesters, a group known as, that they called themselves the People. And so they presented, and then council also discussed, and the mayor was part of that process. There are a couple different things and a couple different ways things can go, and that's where we're at right now. City Council, I think, uniformly wants to make sure that we take some steps to make some improvements in our community, that we make relations better, that we provide greater transparency. And so those are all things that I think all of us are committed for. And there's a couple different alternative methods as to how we might get there. One proposal is that there be a kind of a private study group that might be endorsed or supported by City Council. Another proposal is to look at it more as a formal city committee. And we work in the city in conjunction with both types of groups. So earlier this week, we had a parks issue with purchase of some open space, and we heard from both the representative of the Park Advisory Board, which is the formal city committee on those issues, but we also heard from other interest groups in the community, the Trails and Open Space Coalition, a biking group, with respect to their input. And so whichever method City Council ultimately decides to go with, we'll still have an opportunity for other private individuals to provide input to us. That's part of our public process we use here in Colorado Springs. But the question really in front of us that we're wrestling with, that we'll decide over the next week, is should this be simply an endorsement of a private group's efforts, or should this instead be a formal city committee that's set up with all the processes? There's some important distinctions.
That's what I was just going to ask. Yeah. What are those distinctions?
So let me talk about what some of those distinctions are. Part of it is who appoints that committee? Is it individuals who are ultimately elected by the people, or is it a private group? Another part of it is, are the meetings open to the public and subject to open records and open meeting laws? And so those are some of the key distinctions. And then how much resource support is there from the city? When Trails and Open Space Coalition asks questions, we answer them, but we're not there providing the day-to-day support. Whereas with the Park Advisory Board, we have city staff that are providing the necessary support for them. Based on the comments from my colleagues, I think most of them tend to favor a formal city committee. But the Austin group asked for some additional time to visit, and there was a willingness to provide that additional time, but not a lot of time. And so next week, council will be meeting again, and at that point, I believe we'll be giving direction to staff as to which direction we want to go. And I say giving direction to staff because if we go the formal city committee route, we actually have to have an ordinance adopting that. We need to have an appointment process. We need to have an interview process. So if we go that route, there will be a public application process. And so members of the community who are interested in a bigger role than simply watching or participating can actually apply to be on the committee and say, hey, I'm involved. I would like to provide input. There's a lot of work that will be involved. We have some city committees that don't meet very often. This one we anticipate will be meeting fairly often. And the proposal from the protesters is that there actually be some requirements to get some research on a first-hand basis, to go on a ride-along with an officer, to be familiar with what really is taking place. And so this committee then will require some work and some involvement, and that's an important part of all of our committees, right? Our Parks Advisory Board doesn't just show up at a meeting. They actually go out and look at parks. They actually
Do the research
and advocate. And with all of the committees, they're all advisory because ultimately the city's elected representatives who are chosen by the people make the final decisions. With some of those, the final decision rests with City Council. But with others of those, such as the day-to-day administration of the police department, the final decision rests with the popularly elected mayor, and so he is the one or she is the one who makes those decisions ultimately in our community. In that process, then, City Council, if they adopt a committee formally with the city or if they endorse a private committee, we'll be receiving that committee's input, and then we'll decide which of those to forward as recommendations to the mayor.
Okay.
Because we don't have, under the city charter, the power to say, thou shalt do this. Now, I will say, historically, since the time I've been on council, and I think since the time that John Southers has been our mayor, there's been a very collegial working relationship between the city, amongst the administration, represented by the mayor, and with the city council. So I'll use our budget process as an example. The mayor presents a budget, and then city council says, hey, would like this to be included, or can you address this? There's also a public process as part of that. So one of the ones that came in this last budget that's there, some firefighters said, hey, we need an additional ladder truck. And so ultimately the decision was to add that into the budget. But in each of those instances, the mayor has worked with city council in a collaborative fashion to try to get what everybody wants and to get it accomplished. So while the city council doesn't have the authority to tell the mayor that he must do something, this mayor has certainly shown a willingness to work with city council when recommendations are made. And so regardless of which committee is formed and regardless of the process, that committee will present recommendations to city council. That'll be in a public setting where people are able to hear those recommendations. City council will then choose which of those to forward to the mayor. And in some cases, as with planning commission, sometimes we modify what the proposal is, but then we will then determine what recommendations get forwarded to the mayor and then advocate with him to get those accomplished. So it's a process that involves a lot of public process for a reason, because this is the people's government ultimately. And so there's a public application process. There's the appointments are done in a public meeting. Ultimately, the decision, if it's a city committee, their meetings are open to the public and subject to open meetings and open records. But certainly, whatever the recommendation is that comes to council, we'll look at that and then choose in a public meeting with public process to make recommendations. Now, that's the formal process, but as always, citizens have the opportunity to provide direct input to members of city council via email, via calls, via communications. We have public comment at every meeting. Now, sometimes the electronic format we're in because of COVID isn't ideal, but even when there's a glitch, we make sure that we come back and get that glitch fixed and add that additional public comment. We've had to do that on 2 occasions where it didn't work quite smoothly at the beginning, so we had some people comment then, and then we reopened public comment later because we think that's an important part of what our council meetings include, which is the opportunity for the public to be able to communicate with us. So one of the reasons why no final decision was made at yesterday's meeting is, again, we want the opportunity from the public to be able to comment and say what's their preferred alternative. And there might be some people, actually I'm confident there are some people, who weren't aware of the different proposals that might be out there. And so giving them the opportunity to comment or offer their own suggestions or ideas, that's all part of the process and why city council meetings are open to the public. And not just theoretically open, but we broadcast them on Comcast. We put them out on Facebook Live. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that you can do it. And if you're ever bored late at night, you can watch some of those.
You too can be informed. Yes.
You too can be informed. And this week has been a long week. We had a work session on Monday that went till, about 7, started at 10, so about 9 hours. And then Tuesday, I think we finished, 8 or 9. Yep. So, another 10, 11 hours. So there's plenty of viewing opportunity for those who want to do it. But having that be in public, having that process be open is an important part of what we in the city government believe is critical, just like this podcast. We want people to be informed and have the opportunity not just to give input, but also to have the information necessary to give good input. And by good, I don't mean I agree with it or not. I mean it's informed and you've got the opportunity to find out information. So we listened to citizens and proposals. We had discussion amongst council. There were some who might have wanted to go forward immediately that day. And give direction to staff, but we thought it was important after discussing it to actually give the opportunity for the public to comment, to give input. Where do we go from here? Well, we'll be looking at what that comments are. The Austin Group asked for some additional time to be able to prepare and perhaps harmonize their proposal, which was very different in some ways and similar in others. With the protester group. And so I think you'll see, hopefully, people working together to come forward. As we do that, it's pretty rare for someone to get everything they want. We have a community of 500,000 people here, and lots of us don't even agree on what type of soda to drink or what kind of beverage to drink. And so we have people with incredibly diverse views, and that's one of the strengths of our community. And so as we go through this process, we're going to be working to try to make sure that we come up with a proposal that's going to be the best going forward.
So what will Tuesdays, either of you could answer was too,
Well,
Ted. But
and
what
this
will
is why we
Tuesdays-
like having you on too, Wayne. We don't even have to do anything on the podcast.
That's right.
Well,
What will Tuesdays
Yeah.
look like? I guess so. That will have public input
Yeah. Talk about the upcoming meeting and how that might be a little
from
bit
both
different.
groups, but also anyone who's listening who says, you know what, I have an idea
Yep.
or an opinion.
Which, and by the way, I enjoy this because you've already answered like 5 questions without us actually having to ask it to you.
Because
so
he
it's
knows it pretty well.
it's been perfect.
Well, I've been really engaged in this process.
Yes.
From the trip to Austin to a series of meetings to discussions with colleagues to meetings with the police chief and the mayor. It is important that we address this. And let me talk real briefly about some of those. But we want a community that's safe for everybody. We want it safe for all communities. We want it safe for our officers. We want it safe for everyone. And so how do we best do that? What are the ways we can improve relations so that folks may disagree on issues but be able to communicate peacefully about those disagreements? I think one of the good things that's happened in our community, when you compare how our citizens have reacted and conducted themselves in our police department, and you look at what's happened in some other communities, I'm really proud of the fact that we've almost 100%, not quite 100, but very close to it, had a very productive relationship where people expressed their views and they did it in an appropriate fashion. I mean, the First Amendment's one of the cornerstones of our nation's founding, and that ability to be able to offer ideas. And frankly, compared to some other proposals I've seen out there in America, the protesters' proposal was well thought out and had a lot of reason to it. And it's one of the reasons that it impressed City Council. What you're going to see at Tuesday's meeting is the council will have had the opportunity to receive input from people via email, via other messaging communication forums. There obviously has been some media coverage about these issues, and so people have had the opportunity to at least get some information. And then the Austin group asked if they could try to work with some folks and maybe come up with a more concrete or comprehensive proposal. So we'll see what they have to come forward with. We'll look at what other members in the community might present and might give to council. And then I think there's enough willingness on council, and I can't ever prejudge what my colleagues will do because they're each independently elected. But at least from my assessment of it, I believe direction will be given to staff as to which way we want to go. Ultimately, a final decision is made when an actual vote takes place, and that won't be taking place that day because the documents have to be drafted based on the direction from staff. But I think you're going to see council continue to move in a fairly quick fashion on this matter. And if we go that public process to be able to post for application fairly quickly, I presume it would be next week, even if we went that route, where individuals could begin to apply to serve on the committee. And in that committee, we want people from across the political spectrum, from across our communities, different communities of interest. We want to make sure that people are open to working with each other and dialoguing, because the goal, at least for me, is to make things better. And what processes can we improve? I had a discussion with the police chief and the mayor on some of the things. I think our website for the police department needs some improvement. It's not easy to find certain information. Some of it hasn't been updated as often as it should. And the chief acknowledged that and said he's making some changes to get that done.
Those are simple changes, but they're big.
They're simple changes, but they're big.
Yeah.
I believe that putting information out there is a process that we ought to be engaged in. When I was a county commissioner, and I know this sounds odd right now, I got the county budget online for the first time. And people think, well, of course it was. Not back 20 years ago.
Somebody has to do it.
Someone has to do it. as Secretary of State, I made it, we had a free database where you can search any business entity, you can pull up business documents, you can search campaign finance issues online. I mean, we tried to make it easy for people to do, easy for people to access, and we need to do some of that with respect to the police department's website. I think they're committed to do that, and they recognize the importance of it. So part of it is that transparency, and I think those are some of the easy processes that we can do. Some of the issues are longer and more complex, but the fact that some issues are tougher doesn't mean we shouldn't address the easy issues. Let's get those done, and then let's move on to the more complex issues. And that's one of the things that whichever process the city council chooses to adopt ultimately, I think that committee is going to be charged with giving us some concrete suggestions as to ways in which improvements can be made.
But that's a good point. I mean, regardless, we're going to have to be patient with some of it.
Yes. But still, I think it's, as you were saying, with the original meeting going to be at the end of June, getting moved up to the special meeting that happened this week, and then another special meeting happening next week. Obviously, this is front and center and something moving along. I did want to touch on in the last few minutes that we have here, you were discussing the protesters and how well it seems that the community and the city have been working together during this, especially compared to some other areas across the United States. I think one area that's been very impressive is, and maybe not so with other cities, is the communication between the two sides. It hasn't been something that we've talked about a lot because we didn't want to make it a dog and pony show and really go out there and this is like a PR stunt or something. But can you talk a little bit about that communication that's been there with the protesters and what you've seen both with council meeting with them as well as even the mayor's office had met with them too?
Yeah, so we've had a number of interactions with the protesters. The mayor's office has done that. The police chief has met with them. Each and every one of the members of city council has taken the opportunity to meet with the leaders of the protest and as well as directed city staff to have additional meetings with them. And so you've had that kind of dialogue, which I think is one of the reasons why we got a very rational proposal from them for a way forward. So instead of, and I'll be blunt on this, I don't think we should abolish a police department. Yeah. I don't think it makes sense. I think when you're in a vulnerable population, when you're a child where you may be in an endangered situation, that's the answer. And frankly, I don't think everyone will stop at a red light if there's not at least a consequence to follow up. So this group, however, has been very rational in what they've proposed. They have said, okay, here's where we think is a process to make it better, to provide improvements, to continue that dialogue. And that dialogue where some reasonable people may have disagreements on specifics, but the fact is we're trying to communicate with each other and to ultimately get to a better place. And I think that's a shared goal that council, citizens across this community, protesters, everyone has, which is ultimately we want it to be better. And that focus is, I think, one of the hallmarks of our community that we've tried to do, whether it's addressing transportation issues in a way that other communities failed with the adoption of the Pikes Peak RTA, whether it's addressing this particular issue, we're able to do that working together. Whether it's, if you read some of the history of how we've provided for utilities in an arid climate, where how we have attracted military bases and missions, all of that has been because our community has worked together, and that's what I think we're going to do in this area as well. And you've seen that from that respectful dialogue. Now, do people get passionate sometimes? Absolutely.
Of course.
Is this an issue that people should be passionate about?
Of course.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we can't communicate with each other and we can't look at how do we actually go forward to improve things.
Well, given your experience and where we are now, like you said, there's going to have to be a lot of compromise and there is frustration, but are you hopeful?
I'm extraordinarily hopeful. I think that we have some very concrete ways in which we can make some improvements in the city. I alluded to some of that with respect to the website, but it's more than just that. And I'm hopeful that working together, we can make some improvements where we can increase the quality of the relationships, where we can reduce the incidences that may occur, where I don't have to attend funerals of officers or citizens, which ultimately for me is one of those goals.
Mm-hmm. That's important.
Well, and I think, as you said, there is hope here, and the future seems really bright with getting with the community to find some answers going forward and some recommendations. I think this advisory board is or committee, however it may look, as you were explaining at the beginning, will be a huge step forward for the community.
Wayne, thanks for the insight and for bringing us up to speed on everything that's happening, which is good that it's happening fairly quickly.
Thanks for having us here, and thanks for all of the public who are so interested in this issue and helping to shape where we go forward. And for those who are watching, before we make any decisions, please give us your input. Even if we have made decisions, we also modify things going forward.
It's not set in stone. And
it's not set in stone, and I think this is going to be a process where there are going to be additional improvements that take place along the way. And that's, I think, what all of us of good faith are working for, and my hope that we get there. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne.
Well, so where can people get involved, Ted? What's the best? I mean, he mentioned some of the...
And I'm glad that you hit on that, and I was about to transition right into that, Jen. All council at coloradosprings.gov is a great place to email if you want to put your comments that way. As Wayne was also saying, these will be public meetings where public comment can be taken as well. So make sure you're staying tuned to the coloradosprings.gov webpage on the city council side of things. That's where we're going to have the updated information about calling into meetings if it has to be a call-in. I know we're working maybe on some other technical aspects that might make it a little easier for folks to comment at some upcoming meetings here. So as of now, since some of those tech issues haven't been fully figured out yet, I'll say continue to look on our webpage or our social media platforms to find out the easiest ways. But to begin with, that email, allcouncil@coloradosprings.gov,
and then
goes
COS.
to all council members.
Yes, and then COS at COS City Council on social media, correct?
Correct, yes.
And of course the city of COS. So all those are good sources. If you'd like to refer to those. And then we want to let listeners know we're going to continue to address this important topic. And we also have not forgotten about COVID-19, the other really important topic in our community and our local response. Our next episode is going to take a look at summer tourism, what it looks like this year, and how it impacts the big economic picture in our region.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great episode. And then we'll most likely, after you guys talk next week, we'll probably get right back into this by late next week. So make sure, again, as I always say, that you're liking, and subscribing to Behind the Springs. We're going to have even more episodes, it seems like, than our usual click coming out right now.
Sick of us? Maybe a little.
Hopefully not. Thanks for listening.